Oh, there we go. Good evening, everybody. My name is Anna Inario, and I'm on the team that helps make the PARC Forums happen. We are very pleased to have Brian Solis. He's a principal analyst at Altimeter. He's a renowned blogger and writer and keynote speaker, and he studies anything from anthropology, digital analyst, futurist, so we're very happy to have him here. In the back at the reception, we also have his book, The Experience When Business Meets Design, so you're welcome to take a look at it and purchase it. It's $20 in the back. And we are excited to have you here, so thank you very much.
Well, thanks for being here. I know that driving in the rain, especially in California, is always a challenge. At least that's what I saw. I live three exits down 280, and it took me half an hour to get here. But it is an absolute pleasure to be home and to have the opportunity to speak about my work. I've literally been out of the country and around the country every single week for the last year since this book came out, and it'll continue for the next couple of months, which has been a real fortunate surprise. This is my seventh book, and you never know what's going to happen, especially when one of my mentors asked me, hey, what book are you writing right now? I said, well, it's called X, The Experience When Business Meets Design. It's about experience architecture so that we could design experiences in everything that we do in business. And he said, that sounds great. What's your next book going to be about? So I was a little worried. But the very personal story, why I'm really happy to be able to share it with you, especially share it with you here at home, is that the book is about experience design in a digital economy, in that you see it with your kids, you see it with younger employees, you see it with your colleagues who live digital lifestyles. I mean, we're changing, and that affects decision making, that affects relationships, that affects attention spans. It even affects belief systems and value systems. And it was pretty ironic that I was writing a book about designing experiences in the digital economy in a book. So I thought I would eat my own dog food and take to heart the message that the book was talking about, which was understand how people are changing and understand how those changes align and don't align with the things that we go and do every single day at work or school or in politics. And understanding how those behaviors are changing, whether people understand it or not, or whether they realize it or not, and try to reverse engineer those insights to see if I could reinvent the book to be an experience talking about experiences. And I used high school teenagers as my inspiration because they have to use textbooks still, but their brains don't fire the same way our brains did back when we were in school. And so I studied how long they could focus in a textbook doing their homework before reaching for a tech distraction. And I started the book about 3.5 years ago. It was pretty crazy research. 3.5 years ago, that number was 6 minutes. They could focus for 6 minutes before they reached for a tech distraction. When I finished the book, that number had dropped to 60 seconds. And I got to tell you, writing for 6-minute bursts versus 60-second bursts is incredibly different. And I scrapped the book and started all over again and realized that there were going to be aspects of not just writing, but designing for an experience, designing for how someone's going to read, how someone's going to learn, how someone's going to retain that information, how someone's going to feel turning the pages. And there were all kinds of really interesting things that I learned along the way. For example, a linear table of contents was not necessarily the best way to help introduce someone to navigate a book. Just like a traditional linear-based chapter structure wasn't necessarily the best way to do it for today's brain. And some of the things that I learned were, how do you organize information in packages so that people don't necessarily have to read left to right? Maybe they could just read in these groupings. And ended up wireframing a paper book to be an analog app. It was some of the most debilitating experiences I've ever had. I think I missed 5 deadlines. I wanted to quit all the time. And the only reason that book came out is because I was forced to finally get it out. But you'll see if any of you do indulge the book sale. There are pages, and the little secret is any page that has 3 columns of text were the pages we couldn't get to. But everything else was incredibly designed and thoughtful and very, very much inspired. And I can never go back and write a book the old way, right? Which is, I think, one of the reasons why I have such avoidance behavior syndrome on thinking about the next book. I don't know if I'm emotionally or psychologically ready to go through it again. But nothing says experience like PowerPoint. So I put together some slides to help kind of talk a little bit about the inspiration behind the book and what the book talks about. One of the things that I do in my day job is I study disruptive technology's impact on business. I look at where it is, and then I have to play it out 5 to 10 years to sort of help businesses understand where they can make the most impactful changes right now and over time. But as an anthropologist, you heard, it's specific around digital anthropology. So I study how all of this is affecting society and cultures and norms and beliefs and values and behaviors. And it's interesting in that when you look at the technology's impact on business, it starts to make a lot more sense when you look at how people are changing. And one of the things that hopefully we all get from that process is the gift of empathy, is understanding that what we do in life and how we see how life is changing is naturally biased. But when you break down those walls and see it for what it is, there are really interesting opportunities to do new things. And in my work, it's interesting when you share this work in Silicon Valley where people are breaking the rules and challenging the conventions and setting the pace for innovation. But at the same time, I work with a lot of companies here and around the world, and they'll see a picture like this, and they will always focus on the woman in the front. And they will say, this is exactly what's wrong with society. Only one person in this picture is in the moment. Everybody else, put your phones down, be part of this. This is the same thing I hate about going to concerts. No one's watching the band on the stage. They're busy Snapchatting and live streaming. But the reality is, it is what it is. And every single person in this image is actually enjoying the experience. And what happens is, at least this is what I've noticed in my research, is that we tend to focus on the very things we can't change rather than appreciating how to create experiences that are going to matter to everybody here. And one of the things that I learned was that there was an opportunity to shift perspective, which is one of the greatest pillars for innovation, was just to see things differently in order to do things differently. So shifting perspective in this picture, well, we could say, well, look at this selfish woman here in the front not sharing this incredible moment with all her Facebook friends that couldn't be there. And that's when I realized that there was an opportunity to talk to and through people, or to create products that talk to or feel, that people can feel, regardless of whether it was B2C or B2B or B2B2C or government or education, that there was just another way to click with people. And we all know that some of the best companies that do that very well are here. But everywhere you look, there is this great opportunity to shift perspective. And some of us in the room know that we're clicking a 3.5-inch floppy disk to save a file. Ironically, though, earlier today as I was working on this presentation, I forgot to do just that, and PowerPoint crashed. I had to start all over again, but that's another story. But there's a whole other generation that sees that as a save icon. They have no idea what a 3.5-inch floppy diskette is, and when you start to think about that, it's a matter of perception. We are designing the world based on how we came up versus how other people perceive the world the way it is. And that's naturally friction for experience design. And so what that looks like when it comes to life is you say, hey kid, you ever seen one of these before? Oh yeah, it's cool that you 3D printed the save icon. Like, no, that's a diskette, but cool. And it is this natural sort of crossroads of where we look at the world when we're thinking about products or services or innovation or iteration. And we tend to sort of follow this path of what we know versus looking at fresh new opportunities to see the world differently in order to innovate differently. What I've noticed is that we live in an incredible time where we're connected, we're informed, we're a little bit more elusive than we used to be, maybe a little bit more demanding, definitely impatient. And the access that we have as human beings to information is influencing our decisions. We don't necessarily rely on the same systems that we used to in order to help us move forward. If you think about, I don't know if you've ever done this, but in the world of patient experience, one of the biggest challenges that hospitals and doctors and patient care providers have is that a lot of us are actually Googling our symptoms because we actually don't want to go see the doctor, which isn't any good for any of us, because if you Google your symptoms, you will all realize you are all dying. So I think that's the ultimate outcome of what we find. But the word experience, aside from the design, when I was writing the book, one of the greatest challenges I found was, what is experience? It's a word that we always use, but it's very difficult to define. I asked so many people, thousands of people, how they defined experience, and I couldn't really get a solid answer, and so I decided to go to the core of the word, but also the emotional roots of it. When we look at our favorite brands, there's a aura of sort of logo and marketing and product and innovation that builds this sort of construct of what the company is. But I tend to look at the human side of it. What is it that they're allowing to do, or enabling, or unlocking, or communicating in all these aspects, of which, at the end of the day, they are actually designing companies through the experiences that people have. And we can try to emulate that all we want, but unless we're really looking at people and how to reverse engineer those emotional reactions, whether it's achieving your goals at work or becoming a princess, these are things that we have to be cognizant about. And in a world where people are becoming more empowered, the number one thing that every business is investing in right now in the next 10 years is how to succeed at customer experience. And it is an element of which people have said that they are willing to pay at least 25% more for a similar product or service if they're going to get a better customer experience. So then again, looking at the word experience and then looking at customer experience, I tried to find what was a common definition for that. And it was fascinating that all of the businesses that I was studying weren't looking at the customer's experience. They were looking at customer experience as a series of things that they had to invest in, technologies, processes, systems. But it wasn't really aimed at, well, how do we actually improve what the customer experience is? Which, if you go a little bit further, well, what is the customer's experience? Where does it succeed? Where does it fail? How does it compare to the other companies that they love? And it's simply because we work in these processes. But if you really think about what customer experience is, it's a sum of all engagements they have with your company. So if it's a great product but horrible customer service, if it's a great package but it's a horrible website, these are things that either add or take away, and at the end there is this number. Right? And a lot of companies will use Net Promoter Score. Are you satisfied with this visit? Well, that's just one sliver of what the experience is. And experience design sort of becomes the brand style guide, if you will, of how we do business. How would you communicate? How would you design for? How would you speak to what that experience is that we want people to have, and what is it that we want them to remember? And that's when we just come back to all of this, is that experience is just something you feel, something you perceive, something you sense and interpret in every moment. And we leave that to chance, mostly. I mean, some of the best businesses really think about this, but it's measured in how you react. And I think that over the last 50 or 60 years, technology has allowed businesses to actually get further away from people, in some senses. In many regards, if you think about the offshoring of customer service, if you think about the digitization of engagement, if you think about chatbots, all of these things are just sort of designed to scale engagement, but automated at the same time. So now what's happening is that there's this level of expectation of what people have, because they use all kinds of cool apps and services in their everyday life, yet their insurance providers, their banks, their doctors, they give them experiences that all of a sudden feel dated, even though we've known that they've sucked for a long time. For example, there's an app here in Silicon Valley that I just absolutely love. It's called Filled. It's essentially the Uber of gasoline. So if you're at the supermarket, or if your car's in your driveway, if you're at the doctor's office, just like app, it knows where your car is, They come, fill up your tank, you don't even have to be there, and then you just get the receipt in your email. People call me lazy for using that app. Maybe it's a little bit true, but who loves going to a gas station? I don't know if anybody likes going to a gas station. I mean, unless you really need those Cheetos. But it is just yet a standard, though, like Uber, that just starts to change the idea of how you can get services or how you can get products, of which then starts to unfold in a whole number of ways. Well, why doesn't every business think about me that way? And it's simply because we're making decisions and we're holding standards against what that traditional customer journey is, right? Every business construct is naturally siloed because those groups within the organization are responsible for different parts of the customer journey. And I call it the cluster funnel because it's actually not designed to work together if it was meant to be measured that way, right? So they're measured individually, but now if the world is becoming more connected and customer experience is supposed to be this holistic, integrated thing, well, now we've got to think about new business models. One of the things that I studied today, outside of books, is digital transformation. How are companies investing in change, both in technology, but also in models and processes and philosophies and the way we work? Because what's happening is, when you really look at disruption, whether it's Borders or Blockbuster or JCPenney or you name it, there is just a moment in time where behaviors shift to the point where you either get in front of it, you keep up with it, or you just completely miss it. And that, it's not overnight, but the infrastructure of how we look at things, even just the idea of experience design, makes us have to really get in front of these behaviors, and we have to know what those behaviors are in order to know what we're getting in front of. For example, it's 2016, we still haven't had a meaningful conversation about what a website should be. And if you think about short attention spans and someone trying to make a decision, whether it's about finding a doctor, buying a car, or finding a solutions provider, or finding whatever it is, we don't have the capacity or the time or the patience to think through the old web constructs. And this is actually starting to break apart how people search on the internet, to the point where I've spent the last 2 years working with Google to figure out how Google can matter in 10 years from now. Because in the search engine, their biggest fear is that if we can't get companies to change, they're going to keep stuffing our indexes with websites that nobody wants to visit or see. But that same philosophy and methodology is spilling over into these enterprise apps, or a lot of these apps, or a lot of these startups, where we're not really even thinking through what are we trying to do. And it turns out that in a lot of my work in the book design side was, we tend to be really good when we are focused on something, and the simpler or the more elegant you can make it, whether it's aesthetic or whether it's just informational, the better people do with that. And what's that old quote that, if you can't communicate simply an idea, you haven't figured it out well enough yet. And that, for me, was the hardest part about the book. I spent a lot of time with companies trying to be the best in their industry, and this company shall go unnamed, but I was just in their headquarters trying to explain to their R&D department that they could actually just stop spending time and money on their own proprietary navigation systems. I don't know that anybody actually likes them. I was, right after that meeting, I was in a car being driven, and they put the drivers in their cars so that you get the experience of the brand. But as I was, it's so funny, this actually happened. As I was being driven to where I was going, the driver took his phone and put it on top of the navigation screen and was using Google Maps. Instead, I said, "Can I please take a picture of that?" So he had no idea what I was talking about, but I did take the picture. So the idea is this, is that we can design and invest, and we can iterate, and we can innovate all we want, but the experience that people expect is now not just governed by what your competitors do. It's now influenced by the other products and services that they use in their day-to-day life. And so the idea of experience design now, well, it can come from anywhere. I recently did work with Starbucks, and one of the things that they told me was that, you know, they don't look at other coffee companies when they're thinking about innovation. One of the things that they're really keen on is the relationship between retail, their mobile device, and reimagining loyalty. And their inspiration came from fintech startups. And they spent a ton of time researching the user expectations and experiences with these fintech companies who were trying to disrupt banks. If you think about banks, your bank app is like that picture. It has all kinds of stuff. But what they had learned was people just wanted simple things, interactions, simplicity, elegance. They didn't need everything in one piece. And as a result, I don't know if you know this, but there is more money on Starbucks cards than there are in a lot of banks around the world. And it's by design. So when I study change and I study innovation, and I even try to get in front of experience design, I always hear that the real challenge is just, it's a human challenge. It's whether or not we can break process, whether or not we can get management to support our new ideas, whether or not we can actually move inside of a rigid, risk-averse culture, whether or not we want to even try, whether or not we want to deal with the politics or the egos inside of the organization. Most of the time, there's always someone that doesn't want to change and they're willing to fight vehemently for it, and they're going to completely undermine your efforts behind your back. But there's always a reason why we can't do something. I can tell you this, is that in all of my work, it's very rare when someone at the executive level comes down and says, you know what, I had this dream last night. All of those things that you were talking about, we've got to do them right now. I'll give you all the budget and resources you need. What ends up happening is that bit by bit, pilot by pilot, relationship by relationship, change comes from the middle. It comes from us. It comes from people who are willing to learn new things. And this is, I think, part digital literacy, is looking at how people are changing and understanding how experiences could be different for them. But like me and trying to learn how to do a book differently, the biggest thing for me was unlearning. And I see this all the time. The biggest challenge is, how do you see something differently if you're still holding the past as the standard? I think the foundation for experience design is something that begins with both learning and unlearning in order to learn and do things differently. And this is why the whole anthropology side of me had to come out, which was understanding that we tend to look at things in groups, right? So one of the challenges I hear from a lot of executives, especially those in management and HR today, what's your biggest challenge in business right now? Oh, millennials. Well, it's just sweeping. All of them? Well, they just want to work differently. They were raised differently. They want to be measured differently. They want to try different things. They want to move around the organization. It's like, well, okay, so what if I came back and said, you know, one of the biggest challenges I'm facing in the world of innovation is old people. What I found was that just grouping people like that is just, it's not ever going to work. But understanding the behaviors that drive change, and to what degree and to what extent and why, this is where real empathy can come to life, and you have to actually want to know what's going on in order to design the experiences that are going to matter to them. Otherwise, you're just designing stuff and hoping it sticks. What I found in all of my research, in every single book, because people are always at the core of my work, was that there was this group of people that were starting to form that I called Generation C, where the C stands for connected. It wasn't age, income, education, geography. It was lifestyle. It was aspirations. It was beliefs. It was intentions. It were these groups of people who shared things. And in this case, those who lived an active digital lifestyle expressed similar behavioral traits and goals and values. I found that in decision making for a variety of different industries, B2C and B2B, that 55-year-olds and 65-year-olds were making the same types of taking the same types of actions that 25 and 35-year-olds were, just simply because of what happens when you live an active lifestyle that is either digital or especially mobile. And there's a lot of studies around this, and we're just starting to really understand its impact on, a lot of it's called neuroplasticity. We're actually reprogramming our brains the more we use our smartphones, for example, because you look at them about 1,500 times a week. It adds up to about 177 minutes a day, and if you think about what you're doing in those minutes, everything about it is changing how you interact with information. It's also getting you to be really good at how you find information. It's also helping you tune out the information you don't like. It's also turning you into a little bit of a narcissist. It makes you want to share all of your meals, and if you don't get the responses from people on social that you want, you kind of feel bad about yourself, and so you go and share something else in order to get that validation. And how this plays out is it's wonderful because it forces you to either judge it or to try to interpret it and make meaning out of it. This is an art series where the photographer takes the smartphone out of people's hands in everyday scenarios. This is one of the images. It's actually pretty great, and it's mind-blowing because it's so true. But you think about this, a lot of us start our mornings this way, a lot of us end our nights this way. By the way, if you end your nights this way, it reduces your capacity to be able to get deeper sleep. It's a whole other thing we could talk about. I had to figure this out. But it's also an image that I use to convey of how the market is changing. And I call it the ego system. Because we're getting really good at, and this is not by design, at least our design, it's intentional in terms of technology design. But all of your devices, all of your apps, all of your favorite social networks are teaching us that you are the most important person in the world. And nothing can come fast enough, nothing can be good enough, and you always have to dive back in. To the point, though, where it's not going backwards. This is a real sidewalk in China. I want this in every airport. We might think we're walking really fast while we're texting, but we're not. We're not even walking in straight lines. But it's hard because a lot of decision makers that I know are not really, they'll say they're customer-centric or they're employee-centric, but they're really not. They're actually shareholder-centric and they're stakeholder-centric. And the whole construct of how businesses operate, they can't see this, so they judge their way out of having to appreciate this. So I'll have executives who will tell me, Brian, totally get it. World's changing. I've got kids. I see it all the time. I lock their phones in the bread box so that we can have dinner together. Well, as a parent, I can tell you it's probably not the best thing to do. What your kids want to know is that you get them, and what customers want to know is that you get them, and that you're not trying to change them, but you're trying to at least appreciate them and understand that you can come out of your comfort zone and try to meet someone in the middle. So executives will say, well, don't you think this is getting to be a little too much? At some point, this has to stop, right? Because we can't continue this way. And I'll say, you know what? You're exactly right. I have a rotary phone on the standby, just in case we start going backwards and we start getting rid of technology. But the truth is, not really that crass. I'll say something more positive, like, it's a great question. And I think it's good that we're introducing a little bit more philosophy into business. I don't know. Let's talk it out. But it's not going backwards. In fact, I would argue that Maslow's hierarchy of needs could be revised for today. In that, whether it's superficial or not, I mean, it's not ours to judge. It's just, it is what it is. And so understanding that these things play out in everyday scenarios. This is a real picture, by the way. I love the guy in the background. What's this guy doing outside, and this guy taking a picture of this guy? This is, whatever it is, it's really good. I mean, he's just enjoying a soda. So no, it's not going backwards. If anything, it's going to become more intimate and immersive and absolutely blur the line. So just the more we continue to look at this and say, yeah, I need to change it, we're not going to change it. What we need to do is steer it. And to steer it, I think in a positive way, takes experience design. It's understanding, well, what's going to make what's behind those goggles really productive and healthy and wonderful and memorable and unforgettable and shareable, because we are becoming what I call accidental narcissists. I've studied this. It's funny that I even have to study this. How long is too long to wait for an Uber before you open Lyft? The reason I study this is because it's a thing. That number continues to drop every 6 months. Recently, I studied it in New York. That number was 4 minutes. If a car is 4 minutes out, you're going to open Lyft just to see if the number is lower. I want you to think about 4 minutes, though. I mean, you have a car coming to you. You see the driver, you see the reviews, the payment's going to be all handled. You're all good. 4 minutes. Ugh. So you open Lyft. It's incredible. But I study this because as the consumer, the customer, human beings in general become accidentally narcissistic, because I'm a hopeless optimist, can't say it in a negative way, that need for designing those types of experiences become the standard for engagement, right? The fact that we, in every company we work with, in some way, shape, or form, competes with the Ubers of the world simply because of how they're teaching and conditioning consumers to think differently about services and products and engagement. So there was a fantastic commencement speech that talked about this is water. And David Foster Wallace, big hero, famous novelist, he talked about just sort of this, he was talking to students and he was trying to prepare them for what lies ahead, I guess, which is the purpose of a commencement speech. But he really brought it home for me. This was part of the thing that changed my whole perspective on looking at the idea of a book differently. Was I watched that video and he talked about how, the story of some fish swimming, and that two of them were going along, and when one of them comes up on them and says, "Hey boys, how's the water?" The other fish look at each other and say, "Water? What's he talking about?" And it was this notion that we tend to take for granted our environment. And when you do stop and take notice of it, you realize that we are clicking on 3.5-inch diskettes, or we are looking at remote controls at home, and why we still have reluctant relationships with these things. That we can now start to realize that everything in our life, whether it's personal or at work or at school, everything could be redesigned to deliver better experiences that meet the needs of how people are changing. The fact that we thrust all of these old things upon people is just simply because we haven't realized that there's an entire generation of people who are willing to break ties with those very things right now, whereas we didn't want to, so we didn't take it so seriously. But what's happening is the more empowered we become, the more demanding we become. The more demanding we become, the more elusive and complicated we become. Where we become so different than the previous generations of customers, we are not going backwards. Right? If you use an Uber and you really like it, chances are you're not going to use a taxi. You consciously choose what has meaning and what doesn't in everything you do. In fact, some of us are probably overwhelmed by the amount of choice that we have these days, but that doesn't mean that we can't not look at ways to innovate in the smallest and the simplest things of how we live life. Because once you have felt a lovely, wonderful, delicious experience, you don't go backwards. That, in fact, starts to influence how you look at everything else. And I think there's great power in that, whether you have the ability to do something about it tomorrow or whether you take smaller incremental steps over time. Just even acknowledging that you can design better experiences for people, I think, is a really good place to start, because we've all had them. If you close your eyes and you think about that last great experience, or that experience that you've held on to your entire life, and what about it was so amazing and endearing or just wonderful and special, and if you turn to the person to your left or to your right and you shared what that was, this whole room would be filled of 100 different stories about wonderful experiences. Someone designed that, or someone gave that to you. It's a gift. People want that. People expect that. And I think it's our job in everything you do, even if it's content marketing or social media or product design or packaging development. Everything is a touch. Everything could be an experience. And I think innovation in customer experience is all of the things that we do to conform to how people are changing rather than forcing them to conform to the old way of doing things. And we tend to do that. I mean, everything, how we talk, how we communicate, what we publish. I mean, when's the last time you read an instruction manual? Nobody has time for that. Yet people spend hours and big budgets putting these things together. I got a barbecue recently, and out fell this manual on how to put it together. I didn't even know what to do. I'll tell you what I did do. YouTube. Because there's always somebody who's made a video to teach you how to do something. Why didn't the company think about that? Because the process of putting together that manual is what we've always done, right? That's how we've always done it. Said no successful entrepreneur ever. I think that there are opportunities to ask different questions. We tend to hold ourselves to the questions we've always asked. Those are the standards. It's how we brainstorm. Someone even calls a brainstorm to give you hope that we're going to come up with ideas or at least collaborate. They'll say something like, hey, let's think outside the box. Cool. But psychologically, all I'm doing is putting you in another box because I haven't changed anything about how we're going to work or what we're going to value or what we're going to do differently. In fact, I could bet you that no matter how many great ideas come out, and those that don't because they're afraid, it'll always go to the highest paid person in the room, right? Because they're the decision maker, because the things are hierarchical. But especially right up the road and how we think about, especially here, innovation is at the core. You got to ask different questions. You got to do things differently. Like, I don't know, let's look at ketchup. How long did it take us to figure out that the traditional ketchup bottle was a horrible experience? But rather than change it, we had strategies. Oh, well, you just hold it at a 45-degree angle. Or you hit the soft part of your hand. Oh, no. My idea is the best. You have to use a knife. Whatever it is. Or we could try gravity and a nice squeeze, right? This revolutionized the whole idea of condiments. Even jelly has been revolutionized as a result. Because someone decided to ask a different question and do something differently. So the very thing that pushed me over the edge to redesign the book was watching a video of a 1-year-old baby using an iPad. It was very natural, seamless, wonderful, intuitive. Then her father takes the iPad away and then gives her a magazine. Instinctively, so she starts crying because it doesn't work. And her father says something profound at the end. Steve Jobs has forever recoded my daughter's brain. To her, a magazine is an iPad that doesn't work, and it will be that way for the rest of her life. And it was, I was actually just looking for cat videos at the time. And this video ended up changing my entire course, because that's exactly right. I am going to push the magazine onto her when people like her, because that's what I know. I was going to push a book onto the industry because of what I know. Or I can challenge myself, ask different questions, put myself in a perspective of how could I create something that is a great experience for someone who naturally sees the world differently, the save icons of the world, the iPads of the world. And that was what led me to start looking at everything, like parking signs. I want you to think about the moment you actually have to read this. It's not going to be because you're casually strolling and you look up and you say, when's the last time I've actually read a parking sign? I'm going to do that right now. This is in New York, so you can only imagine how many people are yelling at you and honking at you while you try to read this thing, and all you're simply trying to do is figure out whether or not you can park there. Just like for 40 years, all you were trying to do was put ketchup on your French fries. But it was difficult. So finally, the city of New York says, well, maybe we need to think differently about the parking sign. It's time. So they put this whole call out to agencies to redesign and rethink the parking sign. And when you do that, you get a parking sign. You get a better, cleaner looking parking sign, but you get a parking sign. Is that a better experience? Well, I can tell you that learning how our phones and networks and apps are changing our brains, you could actually reimagine how you present information to a brain that's different, that doesn't want to read left to right, top down like that anymore. And there were a whole bunch of UX designers that really looked at design cues from apps that deliver better experiences, and they came up with other things. Well, what if you made it visual? What if you did this? What if you made it so that it was instantly recognizable? Well, we didn't think about that because we were following the templates of parking signs. And that's what we do in a lot of our work. I just believe that relevance is one of those evolving things. What you define as relevance and what someone else defines as relevant are not necessarily one and the same. People sometimes know what they want, sometimes they don't know what they want, but once they have it, it's the best thing and they can't ever be without it. But this is that opportunity for experience design, is asking different questions and actually actively trying to answer them. And then once you start experimenting, you start measuring what type of impact it had on their needs, their objectives, their lives, their ambitions, their challenges, their frustrations, and start to look at all new different kinds of KPIs and metrics to see the impact of your work. And this could be done without breaking out of your silo right now. But ultimately, this is what brings companies together. Some of you probably followed the Apple news today, and some of you are or are not Apple fans. But one thing that I was able to do for about a year and a half was really get inside of the company and try to see. The hypothesis was that everybody who loves Apple wouldn't be able to tell you why they love Apple consistently. And I got answers of, what do you love about Apple so much? You know, everything from, just the iPhone to Steve Jobs to, all kinds of different things. But what I started to find were patterns around the levels of experience that they were having with the products that tied to their personality or their aspiration of who they are, who they saw that they wanted to be. It's not unlike our relationship with our favorite artists, right? In fact, I think that the music industry is a wonderful example for every business to show what happens when you start to not care about your marketplace. If you think about it, there will never be another Nirvana or a Rolling Stones that defines a generation, because it's going to be generations of people who will never pay for music, just because that's the way the world works now. And what happened is that if you think about the ecosystem, artists, bands, musicians, when I was a kid, I used to have posters on my wall of my favorite bands, and posters, for those people in the room who don't know what those are, they're, just kidding. But that's because that's who I wanted to be, right? And today's relationship with the consumer and artist is that the artist is sort of these satellites around who they are right now. And that continues to change over time. And one of the things that I was looking for was, what was it about Apple that people could really relate to, and why was it so strong? And it turns out that after reading all kinds of things I wasn't allowed to read, and talking to people who asked me to swear, or otherwise I'd be killed, never to say who they were and ever actually write about what they told me, was that there was an experience arc across each product and across the universe. Very intentional. And if you really start to break it apart, and I do in the book, you can actually reverse engineer exactly what they're doing. And you can see to what level there is an articulated experience. And then it is broken down into each moment of truth, into each element of that journey, into each element of that relationship. And it is by design. And it's incredible. Whether we think they're innovative still or not, they still have mastered the idea of experience design to the point where things like a box are part of the arc. by the way, there's somebody's job who does this to open boxes, and I think their workman's comp is all about paper cuts. But it is a different narrative, and it's all one thing and then part of everything. And it's really special. In the book, I even talk about job descriptions and how they all start to show alignment around the things that you see on the site and on the box and in the product. And so it's not impossible to think this way or to think differently. It's just really thinking about, well, who are we trying to reach? Right? There's going to be groups of those folks. What do they value? How do we design the types of experiences that we feel are going to be relevant and amazing for those different types of groups of people, yet all of them together? And there's, I believe, a way to approach all of this, whether it's UCD or human-centered design, but combined with storytelling, but working towards what I call experience architecture. This idea of, companies tend to work backwards. They think about what the brand is, our vision statement, our mission statement, our value proposition, and then they start thinking about products and services, and they build this sort of infrastructure to support sales and marketing and support. But I think it's starting to work backwards now, in that you will judge any brand or business that you do business with based on how you actually feel in each moment and all of the moments together. So that is where I think we start to design, well, what's that experience that people should have? What's the construct of that? Let's think about an experience framework. Let's then bring that to life as a customer experience strategy that reinforces what this bigger experience should be. Then let's bring it into all of the elements of interaction and engagement into the touch points so that everything is firing off the same cylinders. Because all of these things together become the brand. Rather than saying this is who we are, we make you feel who we are, and you become part of that. And that, I think, is sort of the core of these brands and these businesses that people absolutely love, that they can't put their finger on, but it's because you are part of something that's bigger than you, and they are part of something that's bigger than them. And that creates this community of engagement that brings all of these worlds together, where you see the journey, the touch points, the products, the services, the policies, the metrics. None of these things today work in a way that allows you to measure up towards experience. Yet there are expectations for it and opportunities for it. And I mean, IDEO, which is up the road that a lot of folks talk about, the practices of which they use around human-centered design, a lot of it is just published free online. We can start borrowing and applying some of this to our everyday work today. But it really starts with looking at who people are, how they're different than us, how those group together, the context of their environments and how they're different from us and how we operate today, and their activities, their goals, their ambitions, their aspirations. There's a lot, for example, that we could learn from Tinder. I know that sounds weird. But in fact, there's a lot of really interesting studies that show just the swiping culture and the effect that it's having on how people want to make choices. If you could just make it easy, swipe left, swipe right. And that everything from education to e-commerce are now starting to play and take these insights around user experience to figure out, well, how can we play that out into the simplification of choice for consumers, whether it's everything from website design to product design to Amazon. I mean, just think about it's amazing to me. I mean, Amazon is absolutely a disruptor, but just type in blue dress shirt. There are 75,000 choices. Just being able to simplify that, I think, is this next level of not only user interface design, but just thinking differently about the customer experience, but also thinking emotionally about it, right? This is, I think, where experience design starts to get really promising and really interesting, is how should someone feel? Why should it be a surprise? Or why should we leave it to chance? Or why do we not even measure it? And how does that feeling carry over? Is it consistent? Are we measuring against what we're saying we're going to do? And how does that relate to what somebody wants to do? And how do these then come to life in characters? There's a lot we could borrow from Hollywood when it comes to customer experience or experience design. The amount of time the best storytellers spend on character development, and then bringing them to life as personas, and then those personas coming to life in storyboards. I mean, there is a whole art and science around story. I actually thought that storyboards, not gonna lie, it's a little bit ignorant, I thought that storyboards were the process of turning the narrative of what was going to be the movie into these cells so that we could play it out before we started spending all kinds of money on production. That's partly true. But when Disney invented it in the 30s for Snow White, it was really about testing the characters and the believability of who they were and the story and whether or not it was engaging. In fact, when Walt Disney told the story of Snow White, he acted out every character against the storyboard for the entire group of animators as a way of bringing them into the world, into this world. Because if you think about what experiences really are, it's about bringing someone into a different world, an alternate reality or a better reality or what have you, to the point where I brought a Pixar artist in to help me storyboard what the high school teenager, ultimately the business professional, how they were going to experience or need to experience the book, so that I can go backwards and understand what I didn't understand through feeling, through immersion. The whole storyboard process has absolutely changed everything. And it's designed to do that because it helps you gain perspective, like, for example, in the way that Disney does at the parks. I don't know if you know this or not, I'm a big Disney geek. But everything that they do, whether it's what you see in the concrete or the trash can or the uniform or the light post, or the fact that the bricks get smaller as the buildings get taller and the windows get smaller too, to give you as an adult that child's perspective of something just being so grand and grandiose. To then taking that same philosophy and applying it to, for example, the Magic Band development. I don't know, it's not in California, it's in Florida, but it's a $1 billion investment in customer experience. It's also one of those interesting products that crosses the creepy line in some cases, but it basically allows you to get into the park, open your hotel room, allows you to pay for your food and souvenirs, but it also tracks you throughout the park. They're looking at that as a way of improving flow. They've already made a ton of improvements, but more so, if you said your daughter wanted to meet Minnie Mouse, well, Minnie Mouse will come and find you, and we'll know her name, so that's where that line starts to get interesting. Or if you show up at one of the restaurants and you made reservations in the app, they'll know when you're approaching and your names are on the wall and they'll greet you. Why I say that hits the creepy line is because just the same way that we define sort of when we looked at that picture, for example, of everybody with their phones up. There's some of us who define privacy as a 3.5-inch diskette, and there's some of us who define privacy as a save icon. It's sort of you get what you want out of the experience, and to a more connected generation, they're willing to give up a lot more to get a lot more. So there's this line sort of moves and blurs. But with that said, there are companies who are thinking about every step of the journey, and they're starting to design every element to be integrated around this overall experience. I spent time with the Philips design team, and believe it or not, there are people in the Philips organization who are designing these experiences. They call them experience flows. Every touch point, every product, every bit, the manual, the packaging, it all has to play into this narrative, into this storyboard. And they spent all this time and all of this money with this beautiful thing that will help change the company, and they're still having to fight inside of the organization to get support, but there's already thinking like this that's taking place. So I will wrap up and we'll go to Q&A, and this is sort of where I want to leave you, where I was inspired to think differently about a book, which is now making me think differently about everything, is that going back to the David Foster Wallace, this is water, this is space, this is blank. Everything does not have to be built upon its predecessor. I mean, there are opportunities still abound for iteration, but innovation is about doing new things that unlocks new value, right? Which can set the stage for disruption, which is doing new things that make the old things obsolete. I think that the beauty about experience design is that it's a new frontier. That book is unwritten. The future of all of this is unwritten. And someone has to write the book. Someone has to write the story about how we get from point A to point X, because at the end of the day, I think the future of all of our work is part-time becoming experienced architects, and that takes innovators, that takes people who are thinking differently, or willing to challenge convention in order to deliver the things that we're already seeing unfold in terms of expectations and behaviors in markets. But now there's actually a road to bridge those two together. And so I hope that you maybe take the time to take a look at X. I will answer your questions now, but I'll also hang out if we don't get to your questions. Thank you very much for making it on a rainy night and for your attention. All right, well, we got some microphones roaming around.
Hi, thank you for your insights. Many of the companies you talk about are multi-million or billion-dollar companies. For a smaller company that doesn't have the mega budgets but wants to use these principles, do you have suggestions in your book that would be applicable for them or for smaller or for startups, places like that?
Yeah, great question. I do, but I also have a lot of free resources for smaller businesses. So anything that I've ever written around micro moments, so if you just Google my name and micro moments, you'll get a bunch of links for playbooks that even at least start to, for smaller businesses especially, help you see how your customers are searching differently, how they're making decisions, what are the questions that they're asking, because then you can find out where you need to be, what type of content you need to create to be there, and then what kind of click path you need to be able to get them to wherever it is that they convert. Those are the small things that really start to teach you differently. For smaller businesses, I would start smaller in that regard. I do spend a lot of time with startups, but even then, they're multi-million-dollar companies too. But we have the luxury of starting from scratch, and so we do start with a blank slate. And in those regards, every bit becomes an opportunity for innovation. But micro moments, I think, are a really great place for all small businesses to start. Any other questions? Not all at once, though, please.
Hi, thank you for this presentation. One of the things that you've continuously talked about is the evolution, the very, very rapid evolution of the user experience. What do you see as reference experiences? There has to be a place where we start from. There has to be a place where we rest in order to achieve the kind of dynamic growth, dynamic experience difference.
It's a really, that is a kind of question I would answer better with a glass of wine. One of the things that I've noticed is that the reference point that you talk about, or what we could just say our center, keeps moving. And it used to be that our reference point could be, I don't know, for example, the home screen on the smartphone was my reference for the table of contents, or the keyboard, of which then now we're starting to realize, well, emoji, or gestures, or voice. So that center keeps shifting. But what I have noticed is that as you get really good at accelerating the ability to make decisions, or informed decisions, I should say, you're on top of that center as it keeps moving, and so you're always pushing what that reference is. And that's what leads to a lot of insightful innovation, or iteration in some cases. So I use the remote control as an example for the center quite a bit, or as the reference point, in that every new technology that comes out for the television just gets put into another button in the same reference point. And now we have, on average, 70 buttons on the remote control today. Netflix, no problem. Let's add a button. But we all know that the reference point for the consumer is so far away from that old reference point that it's time for some change, right? And I think the closest we got to some really interesting change, aside from Apple's new TV remote, is Comcast Xfinity, right, with the voice control. So we have to change the reference quite a bit, and it's going to keep changing. We have a question up here in the front. Thanks, Anna.
Did you consider publishing your research as an electronic thing as opposed to a stack of paper with pages that you turn?
Yes. There's two answers to that. So I did. The first answer was I thought I would have a better example of being able to show you what I've learned on the digital side and bringing it back into an analog world, because a lot of us still have to change analog things for a digital economy. And I am doing what you just asked, but this is why I didn't do it at the front end. It's because I couldn't get the publisher to pay for it. So every aspect, even the design of the book, I had to take on because I broke the business model. They said, if we're going to print for you, the book is the shape of an iPad, and it's 4-color, and it's thicker paper to hold all of that color. If they were going to pay for a new supply chain for that book, I was going to have to pay for the design of the book, of which I gladly did. But then that meant I lost the ability to have them fund the development of design beyond just what you get on a Kindle, right? Which is just a text interpretation of the book. But I am investing in this right now, and it is mind-blowing. The same techniques that went to paper now going to digital to think about books as not being sort of this page-turning experience on a glass screen, which is called skeuomorphism, by the way. It's taking familiar things and putting them into new things. Like that's why your calendar icon looks like a calendar, or your camera or your movie icon used to be film, which is silly, but I'm really blown away by what's possible here. So I'm actually developing this now. So that's a real honest answer. I couldn't afford to do it at the beginning.
So I have another question, but I can't see behind me, so I'm happy to wait.
It's okay.
Yeah, cool.
Hope I don't crash and burn asking this, because you really filled my head up, and I'm an experienced designer, and I really appreciate you did reach that simplicity point, and you said so many things. I'm really thankful for your talk. I was thinking about the word citizen. It's totally lost in this discussion. We're all consumers, and we consume experiences. And I know this was a talk about brands and businesses inherently, but I was beginning to think about how we've kind of divorced the concept of citizenry from experiences. And it's companies that build experiences. And I just think maybe that's a timely question right now. Maybe it's your next book. I don't know. But I'd like to, that's one of those glass of wine questions of what's the relationship of our citizenry and the true aspect of social navigation, not just within networks and within businesses, but as, the polity.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
That's more than a glass of wine. No, I don't know that I have a response to that other than, yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about where this conversation starts to get really interesting is when you just get to the idea of experience design for human beings, and then you apply that human being to a variety of scenarios, whether it's going to school, going to work, or just life, traveling the world, and bringing those experiences back to their world and how that affects how they view. I don't know, if I spend time in Amsterdam and I go back to certain places in this country, it's going to be pretty mind-blowing. But there's a chapter in the book where I talk about the things that I learned from studying traffic engineering and how you could apply those to citizenry or anything really. It's just about the idea of flow and spatial design. Just really, and you apply that to the emotional side or the aspirational side, just really interesting things that we could geek out over. But yes, what the core of the book is, I don't even think you have to think about it as business. It's a book about experience design, and this can be applied into anything. Yes.
So what advice can you give companies that are trying to save money by sending their service overseas where there's language difficulties, there's problems with not understanding idioms, and the end result, I think, is that customers are much less satisfied
Yes.
than if they could talk to somebody who is a native English speaker. And yet, I've only known of one company, I think Dell, that brought their customer service back. Are they successful at that, or is cost the only issue here and customers are not that discerning?
Yeah, I have this, in fact, at 7 o'clock tomorrow morning, I'm giving a presentation to one of the biggest outsourced customer service companies in the world, and this is my conversation with them, is that they are part of the problem in that they are selling and undercutting their competitors by outsourcing this affordable call center support programs to big companies that are actually losing relationships and experiential points because of them. And it is because the entire notion of customer engagement has been so lost to technology and scale and efficiency and cost that it is a cost center, which defies all logic because it is the touch point of which your customer is the most vulnerable. And it is, you can completely trash it, which is what happens in most cases, right? I don't think any of us like calling Comcast, yet that is actually in America, yeah, or AT&T, right? It is the entire philosophy of what customer care is, which is, that makes no sense, but this is my work in my day job, is actually trying to get these companies to realize that this is, customer experience is all of these things together, and it's not a cost center, it's an investment. And in some cases, where, like, if you look at, one of the biggest challenges, however, is that, because all of these things have root causes, right? So how this got to be a problem was all a part of the businesses trying to improve margins, because they have to improve profitability, because they have to report out on a quarterly basis. So it's all of these things sort of come back to, how do we view the relationship between customers versus shareholders and stakeholders? And what are we willing to do from a management versus leadership perspective to compete for the future right now? The CEO of Unilever famously said, I think last year, that in one of the earnings calls, he said that we are not going to continue to report quarterly earnings for the next couple of years. We want, if you're in for the short term, we want you out. We want long-term investors, because we realize that the future of our CPG industry is changing. In order to change, we have to be competitive. In order to do that, we have to spend money. And so if you're going to short us, you're going to affect our ability to compete for the future. So I think this is what I think my next book will be about, is sort of how do you shift management cultures into leadership cultures and be able to change the perspective of what should be a cost versus investment in things like customer support. That is a great opportunity. If anybody's ever tweeted out, especially any airline, where you've had a horrible experience, and they've contacted you to say, look, call me at this number, or I'll call you and I will fix that problem, you feel great. It offsets that moment, but that's still a shift of which we don't get yet. That's part of my work, but to the degree that's deep. That's deep. Yes, your arm went up so emphatically.
So maybe I'm going to piggyback on that question.
Yes, please.
How does that translate to the trend of chatbots and customer interaction? And when you're mad, you want to talk to someone. You want to get a human confirmation that the transaction got done or whatever you were trying to do. Why so many people are looking forward to interacting with a machine when what they're actually looking for?
I don't think anybody's looking forward to interacting with the machine. There's a startup in Los Angeles called @Service. It's essentially, remember the filled story about gasoline? It's essentially, if you have to call Comcast or AT&T, you feel angst even just before you pick up that phone. And you want to talk to a human being because you know that you're not going to get anywhere on email or on the web, or let alone chatbots. But @Service will do it for you. You tell them what you want and what your resolution is, and they will call Comcast for you. That's their model. The fact that a service like that has to exist, it's just a sad state. But it is because it is a line item in the cost column of business. We don't think about this, but there is work that's being done right now to a great extent that's changing that. And it couldn't happen fast enough. Yes. This will be the last one, I guess.
Last question.
I'm wrestling with the fact that experiences will have varied by age. That of my 4-year-old grandson is different than his 70-plus-year-old granddad. So how does a company get schizophrenic and design for a group that has a dramatically different set of experiences than for perhaps, for lack of a better term, the younger group that has a completely different? Does that mean that I need to be 2 views of the product, 2 presentations? I'm not sure I'm articulating this well, but the experiences that you're referencing or should be understood are not uniform across the age of consumers of products of major corporations.
That's you know, if you look at BMW, they used to have 3 series, 5 series, and 7 series, and then they've sort of played around with 6 series and 8 series over the years. But now I can't even remember how many models of the car that they have today. And those are all absolutely designed based on the human research that they do of how younger generations want to drive differently over time and how older generations continue to get older and how they want to drive over time. So looking at these from a product standpoint, you realize that there's opportunities to actually introduce new things. Now, how you market those things and how you productize those things to the different markets, well, that I could tell you that working with them right now from an anthropological standpoint is absolutely changing, because they tend to use the same sort of cockpit design as going back to the gentleman's question over here about the reference point. You know, the common cockpit is the reference point across all of the lines, yet that goes against the logic that we just said, well, we do this car because this generation wants this differently, or this type of consumer wants this differently, because there are behaviors that 17, 25, 35-year-olds will share, for example. But that's why taking a human-centered approach to your question really helps us get the answers that we don't have. I was working with a financial institution, one of the biggest ones in the country, that didn't steal all of our money recently. And as they were studying customer behavior, they formed this group of millennial innovation. They formed this group to study how millennials want to save or how they don't want to save money in order to think about products. And that narrowed the view too much. So instead they started to do what Starbucks was doing, which was looking at how fintech companies were changing the relationship for people rather than their age. And they realized that led to insights for products that they didn't have at all. And they ended up taking those insights and developing a product that is their #1 product today, simply from taking those different types of insights. And I call it the undercover boss moment. So it's that, if you ever watch that show, I love it, even though it has the same ending every episode. It is that moment when you get the gift of empathy because you had to go through life as the person you were trying to understand. You know, what's it like to go through life with a 4-year-old? How do they see things? You know, this is what Disney did very well with the Disney parks. And it just leads to a different type of perspective that leads to a different set of, but I got to tell you though, it's very difficult to get people to want to step outside of their world and their comfort zone to see the world differently. But that's how you do it. Thank you very much. Please do me a favor and take a book so I don't have to.
Great. Thanks, Brian, so much for coming this evening. And just as a reminder, we have our next forum available for registration. It is on November 17th at 5 p.m. And it's going to be Kathy Giori. She's the Vice President of Operations for Arduino. And we're going to be talking about commercializing the IoT. Thank you.